Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Triumph Beyond Trauma. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Officer B, whose story is truly inspiring. Officer B has been a police officer for 27 years, spent time in the Australian Defence Force, and holds a master's in counter-terrorism and security. 18 years into his career, he was involved in a critical incident that changed his life forever. As a result, Officer B suffered life-threatening physical injuries that he was able to overcome. But it was the psychological impacts that he fought so hard against that almost cost his life a second time. With the help of his family, friends, and medical team, Officer B was able to overcome many of his PTSD symptoms and start to lead a healthier life. As a result, Officer B is now using his lived experience to help others through presentations and speeches, and gaining qualifications in mental health first aid and applied suicide intervention. Officer B is an ambassador for the Australian and New Zealand Mental Health Association, and in 2020, Officer B was awarded the Bravery Medal by Governor-General David Hurley. Today we discuss a critical incident that Officer B was involved in. Before we proceed, I want to emphasise that our discussion includes details of this incident from Officer B's perspective, as one of the officers involved. Listener discretion is advised, especially if this topic may be triggering for you. You can choose to skip over this segment, which runs from approximately the 12-minute mark to around 23 minutes. Despite the intensity of this conversation, Officer B shares his experiences with remarkable openness and generosity. There's a wealth of valuable insights here, making this episode well worth your time. If you would like to learn more about Officer B, there are links to his Instagram and LinkedIn profiles in the show notes. Without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma, the podcast that explores journeys of resilience and hope. I'm Rosie, a yoga and breathwork teacher and founder of Tactical Yoga Australia. As a former soldier's wife, mum to 3 beautiful kids, and a medically retired New South Wales police officer with PTSD, I understand the challenges of navigating mental health in the first responder and veteran community. Join us for incredible stories from individuals who've confronted the depths of mental illness and discovered their path to happiness and purpose, as well as solo episodes and expert discussions. Together, we'll uncover the tools to help you navigate your journey toward a brighter, more fulfilling life. Whether you're looking for helpful insights, practical tips, or just a friendly reminder that you're not alone, Triumph Beyond Trauma has got your back. You matter, and your journey to a happier, more meaningful life starts right here. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
No worries. Thanks, Rosie. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. So I find people's backstories really interesting as to why they join organisations, like police or first responders. So I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what led you in that direction.
So I was working as a photographer in the RAF, and I got out 23, I think, and went out doing photography on my own, I guess. And I was an assistant photographer around Melbourne. We were doing commercial photography and that sort of thing. And I guess I was pretty young at the time, and I wasn't probably motivated enough to get out there and sort of push myself and sell myself. And I was getting a bit of work, but I think I just got to a stage where I needed more, or I felt that I needed more of a full-time sort of job.
Yeah.
And I'd thought about joining the police when I was at school, but I never did because I joined the RAF. And then Victoria Police were recruiting pretty heavily, so I applied, and in, I think it was 95, and then started the academy in April 96.
Yeah, okay. And what's that academy like? Is it a very long process if they're recruiting?
In the day, it took a while for me to get in. Probably not as automated now as it is now. The internet wasn't really about, so it was all telephone calls and letters and that sort of thing, and sitting and handwritten exams and that. So there was no sort of computer-based anything. So I don't know. It took probably 6 or 7 months, I guess, from my application to the time that I started. And then, I think it was, so we started in April and finished in September. So I think it was about 8 or 9 months.
Yeah, okay. And where did you go from there?
From the academy, went to just into town, into Melbourne, to the headquarters, and just general duties policing around there, and then to Avondale Heights for 18 months or so. And then after my initial 2 years was up, went to Sunshine, which
Okay, yeah.
was a bit of an eye opener and
Yeah.
pretty busy. So I was there, I think maybe 3 years, and then went out to crime scene, to the major crime scene unit at the Forensic Science Centre. So I used sort of be able to use my photography skills out there too, so that which was good. And I was out there probably about 5 years,
Yeah, right.
and had enough of seeing death day in day out. Going to multiple homicide scenes and that sort of thing. And I had the opportunity to get into Intel in 2005. So I did that, and that's where I sort of stayed until I moved over to the AFP in 2013. So I was at local CIB at Intel, and then interstate Intel, where security intelligence group and armed crime and those sort of places, and then had the opportunity to go out to the airport in a joint team with the Australian Federal Police in 2012, and then they had a lateral transfer, so I applied for that and got accepted and started in the AFP in September 2013.
Yeah, right. How interesting that you'd moved around into a few different roles, and so when you went over to AFP, was it an intelligence role? Where were you there?
Yeah, so while I was out at the airport in the joint team, it was a bit weird because we were went out there seconded to the AFP, but we were sworn in as AFP members. So we were pretty much sort of, I guess, leave without pay from Victoria Police for the time we were there. But then when I applied and got accepted to the lateral program, so I was still in Intel up to that point. I went and did the lateral program. And then when I came back to Melbourne, I went back to the airport, but in an investigative role.
Right.
So it was a bit of a change to what I'd been used to over the last. We sort of hadn't really done any investigations as an investigator since I left Sunshine. So it was, probably 13 or so years since I'd done any of that. So it was a bit of a change.
How was that, getting back into it after that break?
Yeah, it was a bit weird.
Yeah.
I think I still preferred the Intel side of things because it was just, I enjoyed the investigation side of things, but I think I more enjoyed the helping the investigators out and doing the that Intel side and trying to find things that would help with the investigation rather than the investigation itself.
Yeah.
But so be it. I knew that was the case before I went over to the AFP. So it was a change. So it was good. So I stayed at the airport, I think, for about 12 months, and then a job came up in counter-terrorism in town, and I put in for that. I was finishing off my master's in counter-terrorism and security at Charles Sturt Uni, and that's sort of where I wanted to go. So it came up right at the right time. Yeah. So I applied and got started that role on the 1st of September 2014.
What interested you about the counterterrorism? Was it that of analysing that you enjoyed with Intel and finding out that sort of stuff, or was it something different?
Yeah, I think I think I was always interested in national security.
Yeah.
So I think, just doing that master's and then terrorism was a pretty hot topic at the time.
Absolutely.
Leading up to that from 2001, really, isn't it? So, and then, you know, ISIS coming in 2014 and everything happening around that. So I guess it was, it was probably coming from that intel background and then looking into the national security side of things that really piqued my interest, and then having the opportunity to go and actually work in what I'd been studying was sort of another plus too, I guess. So it worked out perfectly, I guess you could say.
Yeah, yeah. And did you enjoy your time there? How did
Yeah,
you
I
find
did.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. So it was sort of when we had a lot of foreign travellers, you know, heading over to the Middle East and, you know, wanting to fight it with ISIS, and so it was pretty busy. There was never a dull moment, really.
Yeah.
So we went. It was good, and I was over there with a few mates that I'd done the lateral course with, and it was interesting and a lot of work. But I thought, you know, this is great. I was in my last subject of my master's, so I was sort of finishing that off and moving into a role where I could use it. Yeah.
How good that you could just sort of slide right in after you'd done all that study and putting it all into practice, I guess, everything that you'd just learned.
Yeah, and I guess you also look back and go, academia is not. I mean, academia is academia, and you study, but then you sort of see things from the ground and practically, and while you can apply it, it's also a little bit different too. So you sort of get to see it from both sides, which is a good thing too.
Yeah, I know that you had a big job with counterterrorism. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, I started at the Joint Counterterrorism Team on the 1st of September 2014. And I was there about 3 weeks, and we got a job to go and speak to a young bloke, Newman Hayter, who ASIO had been looking at for a few months. And we had some info to go and talk to him on the Monday, the 22nd. But you know, there's a few things that happened, and we didn't have enough numbers, so it was put off until the 23rd, and then 4 of us went out to have a chat with him he lived out in Dever Hills, and we went out to have a chat with him out there just to see where his head was at, you know. And I've spoken about it previously, but we didn't have any power of arrest or anything like that. It was more so just to find out where he was, where his headspace was. He'd made some sort of veiled threats against the Prime Minister, was looking up where he was travelling and had his passport cancelled by ASIO, and so and he was also hanging around with a few or hanging around at places that were known for extremists, I guess.
Yeah.
And so that's where he sort of come up on ASIO's radar, and we went out just to speak to him, just to see if we could find out what his intentions were, maybe see if he would tell us what he was doing, or whether he'd heard anything, and I guess just to let him know that we were looking at him, and you know, maybe that might put the brakes on anything that he was planning. So,
yeah, absolutely.
It's still more information gathering and what his demeanour was and that sort of thing. So we went out and had a chat with his mum and dad, who were also concerned with his sort of recent behaviours, and to the point where his dad had gone and spoken to someone at the local mosque and said, "Don't hang around with him," you know, because they'd seen changes in him, and they were a really, really good family. And so his mum and dad were there, and his 2 brothers, and they spoke pretty openly about their concerns and about what they saw Newman was up to. Well, and I guess we were there for about an hour or so, and we went back to the police station and decided to give him a call to see if he would come in and have a chat with us. So my partner called him, and he answered, and there's a bit of to and fro conversation about whether he would come into the police station and have a chat or not. Initially, he wanted to meet us at Hungry Jack's, but not really a nice place to talk to a terrorist suspect and with little kids running around and that sort of thing. So that wasn't ideal. And so we said, no, we don't think that's appropriate. We want you to come into the police station. And we told him he was under arrest or anything like that. It was just to have a conversation. And eventually he decided that he'd come in. I think that phone call was at about 7:15 that night, and he said he'd been in about half an hour. Mm-hmm. And about 7:30, he called and said he was there, he was out in the car park, but didn't want to come into the police station. And so between the four of us, we discussed what we'd do, and we thought, he's here, so let's go and have a chat with him. It's better that he's here than not. So we thought we'll keep it fairly low key, just the two of us will go out and have a chat and sort of reassure him that he wasn't under arrest, and then try and get him to come into the police station, into a soft interview room, and just have a chat with us in there. But we weren't too concerned that even talking to him out in the car park. So either way, it didn't really sort of bother us too much. So the two of us went out. The other two stayed inside. We didn't want four of us to go out and seem like we're overpowering him and and that sort of thing. So yeah, we went out and we shook hands and introduced ourselves. And while we were doing that, he'd reversed his car into the car park at the Little Stars childcare centre, which is adjoining the Endeavour Hills police station. And as we walked, my partner put his folder and notepad on the bonnet of the car, and I walked around to the driver's side just to have a look in the car, because we knew that he was with some mates that day. Okay. So yeah, just didn't want someone jumping out of the car and surprising us. And so my partner was at the front of the car having a chat with Newman while I was looking in, and I heard him say, I heard my mate or my partner say, "I'm going to search you," because there was reporting that he'd been looking at buying knives. So we just wanted to make sure that that he didn't have any knives, and that was the reason we took his hand to start with. So he took his hand out of his pocket. He wasn't carrying anything, obviously, at the time, but he asked him, or told him he was going to search him. Heard Newman say why, and then as he sort of said that, I've looked up, and my partner wasn't there. So I was a bit confused, I guess, at the time. Mm-hmm. And Newman had turned to face me. So he was at the front of his, sort of the front corner of the car, and I was at the driver's side door, so it was 2 meters away, I guess. And he was holding a knife just at his waistband. And I was still a bit confused as to where my partner was. And then at that point, it was quite weird, my hearing failed. So it's called auditory exclusion. Just went deathly silent. And apparently I yelled out knife, and then Newman came at me, and we started struggling and fighting, and 2 meters away doesn't take very long to cover that distance. So I was just sort of forced fending them off with my left arm, trying to get my gun out, and because as you training, knife gun, So all I'm thinking of is I've got to get my gun out. He's got a knife, got to create some distance, and so we as we were doing that, sort of moved back around, just trying to create that distance. And I went to ground just to give myself some time to get my gun out and use my legs to sort of keep him away. But as I'd gone to ground, he walked around behind me, so between me and the childcare centre. So there was no one at the childcare centre at the time. It was 7:30 at night or whatever. And he sort of walked around behind me, and he was leaning over me to stab me. And I'm positive, and I gave that evidence in the coroner's inquest, that his intent was to behead us and put it on video and send it out all over the world.
Yeah.
As they'd want to do. And as he was leaning over me to stab me some more, my partner had regained his feet, and he fired a shot and hit Hayter in the top of the head and killed him instantly. And that was the next thing that I heard, was that gunshot. So everything else prior to that was silent. Hayter fell next to me, and it was a sickening thud, I guess, as he hit the ground, and my partner asked me if I was okay. I said, yeah, at the time I thought it was. And he said, oh, go and get some ambulances. So then I don't know why he didn't. He'd only been stabbed twice.
Yeah.
But anyway, I got up and jogged inside, and that's back into the police station, into the watch house, just to tell them what had happened and whatever. And that was when I realised that I had been stabbed. I felt blood running down the side of my face, and my chest was a bit sore. And I went inside and freaked out a few of the people in the watch house, and called the ambulances, and went back outside to check on my partner, and then I went back into the police station, and that's started getting some first aid, and the ambulances arrived. So it turned out that he was stabbed twice in his left arm. So when he said, I'm going to search you, Hayter's at his hands, he's pulled out the knife from his pocket and that he had in there previously, and stabbed him twice in the arm, and he thought he'd been punched. So that's when he sort of went back and went to ground, and was protecting his gun. And that's when Hayter had turned to me, and then it worked. It turned out that he'd stabbed me 5 times during that. So twice in the left shoulder, twice in the left side of my face, and once in the centre of my chest, which went into my liver. That was the life-threatening part of it, the liver injury. But we were fortunate the ambulances got there fairly quickly and got us both off to hospital and surgery and everything else that night. So yeah, we were fairly lucky.
Wow. Yeah, like incredibly lucky that he didn't get you anywhere else.
Yeah.
So how was your recovery after that? Extensive, I can imagine. Like, it would have taken a while for you to be back on your feet.
Yeah, I was in hospital about a week, I think. So that was a Tuesday. I think I was home the Sunday or Monday. The physical recovery was reasonably okay. A lot of physio on my shoulder, and just getting that working back, because it was they just the surgeons described it described it to me as like a full shoulder reconstruction. So it severed some tendons in there, and I think it was a rotator cuff tendon and whatever else that had to be repaired. So it was a lot of physio in getting back to being able to get any sort of range in my shoulder. It's still not right now. Yeah, so with physio and exercise physiology for, twice a week for plus exercises and all that sort of stuff for a couple of years, I guess, and also the psych sessions and everything that went along with that. So mindfulness sessions and trying to just trying to deal with the trauma, and saying that the trauma was, at the time it was okay to deal with it. I guess it was sort of pretty pragmatic. I've been stabbed. I've got to fix myself and make sure that I don't go too far backwards, and just tried to do the best I could, I guess. And I don't think at times I did, but because my marriage ended a couple of years later, to early 2016, and I wasn't a very nice person leading up to that and into the inquest, and the sons took a fair brunt of that. They'd breathe wrong or just do something minor, and I'd lose my shit. And I was just angry all the time, and ex-wife, quite rightly so, thought, this is not good enough.
Yeah.
She supported me a lot throughout the attack, but it was, and there's probably a lot that happened. There was a lot that happened before that. That wasn't the only reason, but I think the attack was the way that I was acting was pretty much the final straw. So that marriage ended, and and fortunately I was able to. I'd booked in to do the Kokoda track at the end of April, which was after the inquest ended, and I did that. It was 8 days of slogging through the mountains of Papua New Guinea.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of soul searching and a lot of self-reflection on how I'd acted as a father and a husband. And, it was pretty confronting, and it's hard to be honest with yourself like that, and know that when you are honest, it comes with a lot of pain, especially when you know that you haven't been the best person. And by the end of it, I'd come to the realization that he was right and everything, and it was the best decision she could have ever made, was to end the marriage. And I was then able to move on from that to be, I guess, to be a better person within myself, but also be a better father and all round better person, I guess.
Yeah. So you're able to get that acknowledgement of yourself and say, yeah. And I've had it myself, and it's not until you have those realizations, really, is it, or epiphanies or whatever people want to call them, that you're like, okay, yep, that's happened. And, you have to put your hand up and say, yeah, that was me. And then it does enable you to move on, though. And, so from there, what's happened since then for you?
That was 2016. I'd started sort of a new relationship July of that year, 2016, and everything was going along nicely. And then I got posting actually over to New Guinea, to Port Moresby for APEC, and Papua New Guinea was hosting APEC in 2018, and the boss that I had in Melbourne, he was now the boss over for the AFP and in Port Moresby, and got me over there, and I was back into an intel role, and it was probably the best job I reckon I've had since being in policing. and it was great. You know, a lot of autonomy, and we were doing a lot of great work over there. And then my girlfriend at the time, she was in the AFP. She also got posted over there. So everything was, you know, everything was going great, except I was away from my sons and my family.
Yeah.
And then early 2018, that relationship ended, and I think I was using that as a bit of a band-aid solution to everything that was going on, like psychologically, because when that ended, it was just this downhill spiral, and I started, the dreaming about the attack and not sleeping, all this sort of stuff started to come back, which I thought I'd dealt with quite well. And obviously it was just bubbling away. And after a couple of months, I had to come back to Australia, and I walked in to my psychologist, and who I'd sort of stayed in contact with. We'd done some Zoom sessions while I was away, and I walked into her office, and after about 5 minutes, she said, "No, you're not going back. You've got PTSD." And to be honest, that was a massive relief. I was scared of. I knew something was going on when I was in PNG, and I said to a mate in a text message, I said, I'm scared of those 4 letters. And I get back and get diagnosed with it. And instead of being afraid of it, I guess I was more relieved that I knew that I wasn't imagining what I was going through and how dark. And it was just, it was a really, really, really dark, hard time leading up to that and after, of course. But at least I knew that there was something that, we could start treatment for and try and get better. It took a long time, months and months and months of just trying to break through, trying to see some light at the end of the tunnel, even if it was a pinprick. And I just thought it would never, ever, ever happen. And that later that year, my dad died after a really short bout with cancer. So that was in November. So it wasn't 2018 wasn't a very nice year.
Yeah.
And I was travelling up to mum and dad's up in New South Wales to Melbourne quite a bit just to see dad and and all that. And I remember saying to mum one day, look, I've got to get back, because the boys are back in Melbourne. My 2 sons are back in Melbourne. And so my ex-wife is still down in Melbourne. So I've got to get back for the boys, And she said, but you can't look after someone until you're well enough yourself. And, probably to reflect on that and like I said, I did that reflection on the decoded fact, and then through the PTSD and everything else. And unfortunately, it took something like that to really open my eyes to how important some people and things are to me. Like before that, I'd never told my mum that I loved her, and I told my sons that, but it was different.
Yeah.
And I look back and I tell my fiance now, and how I probably wouldn't change what happened, because it's made me a much better person than I was beforehand. And I think she's seen that, and my kids have seen it. Well, they're not kids anymore; they're 21 and 24. So, but I think they've seen it, and and family and friends have also seen that change of this person walking around with a skin of tar over them, having no emotions, and not being able to be happy or sad or anything, to now being able to. I'm not perfect, and still have effects of it, but 100% better than what I was.
Yeah, yeah. And just what you were saying before, getting someone saying to you like that you get that diagnosis, it is, I had the same thing. It was one of the greatest reliefs of my life, because I had been in my own head for so long, and outwardly I presented very well, and I always have. So I felt like no one would ever believe me, like I was going crazy, and then for someone to say, oh, no, yeah, you have PTSD. Yeah, exactly like you said, like, okay, now I can do something about this because I know what it is.
Yeah.
And I just, unfortunately, until like you don't know what that's like for a person. So yeah, I really understand what you're saying there with that, feeling a bit lighter after a diagnosis, which you don't think is going to happen, because you're not, like, I know I certainly thought, it's not going to get me. It won't get me. Like, and then, and well, it did. And I was sort of, I'm very happy to get a diagnosis. Yeah.
Yes. And I think, like you said, it'll never get me. And I always thought it'll never happen to me. Like I'm never going to get attacked at work, or even though I was a police officer, and no, it'll never happen. I'll be okay. Whereas I think we should all, when we go into jobs like that, we should prepare ourselves, and we should think it could happen to me. What will we do? When I say we, including your family, and what will we do if it does happen?
Yeah.
And prepare for that. And it was at the Frontline Mental Health Conference where Malcolm, captain from the army, was talking about exactly that, and it made so much sense. We all hope it doesn't happen to you, or something tragic doesn't happen to you, but preparing yourself for that, I think, is really important, and that's something that we should all do as police officers, or fireys, or ambos, or whatever field you're working in. Is get ready for, or just have your family prepared and yourself prepared for, if something like that does happen, we're ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was listening to that talk as well with Malcolm, and I thought the exact same thing. I thought, you do join those jobs and the risk, but deep down, I don't think we acknowledge it enough, like you say. And I certainly never had that conversation, with my husband. My kids are way too little, but I never had, if something happens to me, what are you going to do next, and what does that look like for you? So I really appreciated Malcolm talking about that, because we certainly don't do that enough.
No, not at all. And I guess I was fortunate enough to meet someone, my current partner, fiance, sort of towards the end of 2019. So after I'd been off work with PTSD and been back, and then he sort of stuck by me through coming out of that and doing the PTSD course at the Austin Hospital, and knowing my background and what happened to me, and having that support from her also helped. But I still never even spoke about that then. And I guess, I've given presentations before about, I never thought it, and I never thought it happened to me, but it did. And until that, and until Malcolm spoke about that, it's now conversations that probably null and void now because I've been off work for quite some time, and and probably won't be going back. But it's definitely something that get people to talk about.
Yeah, so important.
Mm.
So you just mentioned that you've done a bit of speaking. Is that something that you're going to keep doing moving forward from here? Is that what that looks like for you?
Yeah, I think it is important for me in that it's quite cathartic and I get a lot out of it. But I also hope that when I do talk and what I speak about gets people thinking and listening about stuff, I guess, that we can go through. And like we said, you've got to prepare yourself for these sort of things, that in the event that you do have to go through something, that you are prepared. And if I can put my story out there and the challenges and that I've had, plus the positives like the post-traumatic growth, and it doesn't make it as hard a topic to broach with yourself or with others, because I think we're probably all very, no, I'm all right, I'll deal with it, I'm tough and whatever. But being able to, I guess, to admit that you do need some help or that you're not okay is important to be able to recognise, but also knowing that you can have support with your family, your friends, and hopefully work and medical practitioners and whoever else, but also knowing that there is hope, and that people who have gone through some really, really dark times, while we don't go through the same things as each other, and I would never assume to know what someone else has been through, and how difficult it has been for someone else, there is hope. And I think I spoke to someone once and said, I never could see the light at the end of the tunnel, ever. And I never thought that there would be this outcome. I thought I'd just be in this dark place for forever. And then there was a pinprick of light, and then it disappeared, and then it was back again, and then it disappeared, and then it got a little bit bigger, then it disappeared. So it was, I guess it was a bit like climbing Mount Everest. You sort of go up from base camp to camp 1 and back again, and then up to 1 and then up to 2 and then back to 1 and then back to base camp, and you just tick-tacking until you can get to the top of the mountain. And that's what it was like for me. It took a couple of years to be able to, I guess, to get to the end of the tunnel. I don't think I'm out of the tunnel, but sort of standing in that archway, seeing that there is positivity out there, and having such an awesome fiance and people around you makes it so much better, and I guess easier to deal with, because when you have your bad days, they're there, and while they probably don't fully understand what you've been through, they're still there to support you and take it on board and help you take those steps forward. So if I can put some positivity out there and let people know that there is hope, then that's what I'd like to continue to do.
Yeah, and you do. Like, I love listening to you talk last week, and it's so inspiring, despite everything that you've been through, that you can still get up in front of a group of people and talk about it and do exactly what you want to do, and give other people hope that even though you might get stuck like in the mud or in your black cloud or whatever people call it, there can be like that light. And although, like you say, it's not linear, it's not just like a straight line through that tunnel. Like the tunnel's got like little bends and curves and like goes back on itself. And
Yeah.
But it's a journey, and it's so worth it, I think,
Yeah.
to keep pushing and to keep getting to that light a little bit more each time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I thank you so much, because I've really enjoyed hearing you speak, and I've really enjoyed
Thank you.
having you on today. There's so many people out there, even just with this podcast, getting other people to tell their stories as well, that, there is hope out there, and
Mm.
it can get better, and post-traumatic growth is a real thing. And I was talking to Alana from Emergency last week, and I actually found it really empowering when I heard that term, post-traumatic growth, because I thought it was something that I was just always going to be stuck in. I'll have this post-traumatic stress disorder for the rest of my
Mm.
life, and it would never ever change, and I would just sort of always be there in the background. But it's actually, moved and morphed and turned into something pretty amazing almost, and I certainly wouldn't have been here without the trauma that I've been through. Um, so yeah, I guess it's not great when you're there, but something good can
No.
come of it.
Yeah, and when you look back, and like I said, I think I don't. I'm glad in a way that it did happen, because I've been able to go through that post-traumatic growth, and I probably wouldn't be the person I am today without that. And and if I can just give you this quote from Marcus Aurelius, who was a Roman emperor, and part of it says, get active in your own rescue, however that may be. And I think taking those little steps forward is really, really important, and being able to know that there is something there, and that something positive will come is really, really important to know, and not to give up on yourself if you're feeling low, or there's always someone that will talk to you, or whether it's a friend or a helpline or whatever. Yeah, I just I hate hearing the statistics and seeing online someone else has died because of mental health, and it's really quite sad, and happens far too often. So yeah, if we can all take that little step forward and help someone else, that's what we need to do, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll have to leave it there, because that was beautiful.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rosie. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any new ones. We release fresh content every Tuesday. And while you're there, take a moment to leave us a review. I would genuinely appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook at Tactical Yoga Australia, and share this episode with your friends, family and workmates to spread inspiration. Your support means the world. My name is Rosie Skeen. Join me again next week for another empowering and positive episode of Triumph Beyond Trauma. Until then, be kind to your mind and trust in the magic of your consistent and positive efforts. Triumph beyond your trauma is closer than you think. Have the best week.